Hamlet's about. It's a college boy who's dealing with
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paco Ojeda, and this is once again Coffee and Headlines. It is Friday, April 10th. I have my coffee ready to go. I have researched some headlines, and today we have a wonderful guest. We have a guest for the first time. I found myself having a wonderful conversation with a dear friend of mine just a few days ago. She is an actor. She's a performing artist, and what we were talking about is the plague and the fact that we are not the first people to have been under the unfortunate need to be confined to home. So I would like to introduce her to you. She is a professional actress, vocalist, writer, and director who recently relocated to Puerto Vallarta. And aside from that, she is also the artistic director of Kronos Theater Group, a nonprofit in San Diego that connects diverse audiences and crosses boundaries of culture and time. Let me introduce to you Celeste Innocenti. Good morning, Celeste. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Paco. Thank you so much for having me on. This is a wonderful idea and a great show. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you very much. Now, first of all, how are you doing right now? How are you coping with isolation and everything?
Well, I'm a person who absolutely, this is just, I'm suited for this type of condition, but I want to just stress that, I've heard from a lot of my friends and I see the conditions, especially in the US right now, which is sort of the epicenter of this coronavirus. And my heart goes out to everybody. I just want to say that I know a lot of people are not used to being confined and are not used to having things to do in isolation. But, as personally and professionally, this is my norm. And it's just part of, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and lived for the majority of my life in Los Angeles, San Diego. And distances are just so vast. You spend a lot of time at home. And so even as a child, I was always reading and doing crafts and creative projects and things like this. And this is just, I have lots to keep me occupied. Lots of creative projects. Also, I will say that over the last few years, I've adapted my life online, as many people have. So, for example, I teach voice and diction for actors, and I have one wonderful student, Thais Maio. She's a professional actress from Brazil, and she's a good friend now as well, and it gives me a lifeline out there. It really is, to teach online for that type of thing, for voice and diction is perfect because, you can really see the person in an intimate setting. We work on monologues, we work on things like that. Also, my friends are scattered all over the world. So nowadays it's pretty great that you can keep in touch with people all over. There have been some challenges, for instance, in Puerto Vallarta, I have some amazing musical opportunities, for example. Speaking of music and then the theater. But, my guitar teacher, Ariel Verges, who's a cartoon madhouse, you should look him up. He's really wonderful. So now we've adapted to lessons online. Okay. And now I'm forced to practice because I have a lot of time. And I do miss Jean-Guy Como, who is my voice teacher. I really miss lessons with him. So maybe if he's watching, he'll be inspired to that. So in that respect, the vocal, yeah. So and then I can look up sheet music and I can make use of my time and having the internet, fortunately. I have that. I have.
I know that Jean-Guy is watching because he just sent a good morning, and we will get to the good mornings in a second.
Wonderful.
But speaking of lessons online, Celeste, let's dive into the topic. You and I started a really fun conversation the other day about Shakespeare in the times of the plague. What can you tell us about the bard and his creative process when he had to be confined as well?
Well, I was going to kind of segue into that in talking about the theater. So there I talked about how I'm coping, and so the second part though is really the nature of theater, and what theater is to me. It's more of it's an ancient sacred art form, and it's human collaboration. It's a collaboration between actors and each other as a group or a performance ritual, we could say, and the audience, which gives it that extra energy. And there's something about the human voice and the vibrations, I think, involved that make a live performance so much more than something online. So I just wanted to add, the extra thing that I did was I put out some monologues. I happen to have my copy of the complete works of Shakespeare here, my desert island reading. So I said, okay, well, what the heck, so I'll do some, not monologues, but some sonnets. And so you saw the sonnets and you contacted me. Then I saw some other friends who did some sonnets. And then my student Thais said she happened to see it and she was inspired to write a song. So I kind of want to say that my theme here is inspiration, which I think your show is an inspiration. This idea of putting yourself out there, you never know who you're going to touch and you never know who you're going to reach. And then the other thing that I had mentioned to you is I took part in a Zoom, an open reading with the San Diego Shakespeare Society, and that was quite interesting too. And
Yes.
it was the Brady Bunch approach,
The
but
Brady
it can't
Bunch approach
compete
to
with live
Shakespeare?
performance.
Do you think
The
Shakespeare would
what?
have enjoyed the technology that we are enjoying today?
And thank you, because that was going to be my segue. Because what I realized was I was thinking, well, what would it have been like if Shakespeare had the technology that we have today? But then if you think about it, he actually there was a technological boom in the publishing industry and widespread literacy. So this is the way that we are still inspired by Shakespeare even today. So after he died, all his friends compiled not all his friends, but yes, his theater group compiled the first folio and published that. You see, because plays were not a literary output, it was the poetry which was considered worthy of publication. So people laughed at Ben Jonson for publishing his own work, because that was considered very arrogant. So this is something that I just want to say. I think that that's sort of the through line is this idea of technology, how we look at technology in this way in which we're communicating across time and distance. And we're going to be recording this, and so people can watch it later. So yeah, we are communicating across time and distance. And that was the tool of Shakespeare during the time of plague. And I also want to say that my nature is one, and I think that a theater artist needs time to dream. And this is really the most important thing about theater is it's a dream. It's you're dreaming. You're telling a story. You're trying to communicate on a human level with some very basic concepts. I mean, each theme is just but you're just sort of using these characters to fill out your plot and make your statement. And so I think Shakespeare must have been the same way. And there was a lot of evidence because I was doing, a lot of research, which I had done in the past. So kind of a great way to resurrect some of these ideas. So I think his personality was basically really suited for this type of isolation. I just want to quote, there was an interview with the son of an actor, 60 years after Shakespeare died. But he said let me quote here, he was not a company keeper. He would not be debauched. And if invited to, he writ that he was in pain. Okay. And so, I mean, this was probably a guy with an average of 1.5 plays a year who spent a lot of downtime, private time. I mean, he had left his home in Stratford, moved to London, which is a very crowded town. But in London, he moved away from the theater area. And, so he tried to live in quiet areas, so forth and so on. So this just was my picture of Shakespeare. So the plague is something that was obviously throughout Europe over many, many years. Different plagues occurred. The bubonic plague from the fleas of the rats. And in London of that time, it was really dreadful because people were living in close proximity, great pollution. The floors were strewn with rushes, which just, you can imagine the vermin and things. And people would just sort of throw their refuse and so forth outside the streets and the Thames. So you couldn't really wash your hands. There was no concept of that. And the theaters were, you can imagine, kind of in the bohemian section of town, all people from all walks of life. You have the bull and bear baiting rings. You can imagine the rats.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can imagine the infestation. So when the plague deaths reached over 30 a week, the London authorities shut down the theaters. That was it. And a lot of actors died, and there were several plagues. And it was not just in London. Shakespeare, there was a plague 3 months after he was born, and his family moved to the countryside briefly. So this was the type of thing people tried to escape from the city. So Shakespeare was very lucky, or he was also very talented too, but at that time, so the first plague, so I'm going to say that there were two main plague times which produced some great work from Shakespeare. So the first plague, what was it? I wrote the date. It was from 1592 to 1594. So in 1592, there was the first evidence of Shakespeare in London. Robert Greene, the dying poet, the playwright and poet, wrote this kind of scathing critique of him. And then there was, he had Henry VI, but the real playwright on the London stage was Christopher Marlowe. Now, in the middle of the plague, Christopher Marlowe mysteriously died. He had been on a Secret Service mission. It's an amazing story. If nobody knows about Christopher Marlowe, you really should read about him. But, and he may have been this rival poet to Shakespeare. Shakespeare was fortunate because he had been commissioned during this plague time by the Earl of Southampton to write a couple of long poems, very sexy poems, believe me. It was The Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. So very Ovidian, very, very, something great to read in your downtime. He also wrote the sonnets, which were not published until much later, and probably commissioned, at least for the majority of them. And this was something that he made his literary reputation. And then Marlowe dying in the middle of the plague, and then Shakespeare plague ended, meant that soon he became the preeminent playwright in London. So he really made use of that downtime, that 2-year period,
Celeste,
to increase his literary reputation. Yes.
We were talking about theaters earlier, and one of the things that I'm going to share with all the nice folks that are joining us today and that are letting us into their homes is this Globe Theater production of Hamlet that can be streamed for free now on YouTube. Now,
wonderful.
Shakespearean theater is not like going to the theater today. It was really a different experience. Really quickly, how would you advise someone to sit through a theater production in Shakespearean style? And before you answer, one of the things that I was particularly grateful about this production is that it is subtitled. How, once we share the link, once people go back to their couch, they turn on YouTube, they're going to watch Hamlet at the Globe Theater, Shakespeare's famous theater. What kind of advice would you give me and the rest of the people that are watching on how to best enjoy this production?
Well, this idea, I also want to add just during the second plague, Shakespeare wrote some of his best and most mature work. There were a variety of theaters. The Globe Theater was built, but that was sort of for the masses. So the plays that he wrote after the second plague, which were Antony and Cleopatra, some very sophisticated work they performed in an indoor theater called Blackfriars. And so a more sophisticated audience would be able to appreciate that. Now, I'm going to say that I had judged for several years, the San Diego Shakespeare Society produced this Student Shakespeare Festival. And what I learned was, if the director understands what the heck is going on. Now, of course, in Shakespeare's time, they didn't have a director. This was just an ensemble-based performance of actors. If a child understands the Mark Antony speech, the audience is going to understand the Mark Antony speech. Hamlet, for example, is a college student who basically comes home, finds his father dead and his mother married to his uncle. And, there's all kinds of machinations going on. So he's really suffering this kind of existential angst of a college student, essentially. Now, if the actor understands that, if the director understands that, the language doesn't matter. I mean, Shakespeare even wrote, oh God, what play was it? Good question. But he wrote a scene in French, and one of the Henrys. And it is just brilliant, because if the actors understand what they're saying, everybody understands what they're saying. So I will say that if a person doesn't, if a person, because there is, I'll say, a language barrier. It's Elizabethan as a second language. So if a person wants to prepare for this play, not knowing whether it's going to be communicated as clearly as it should be, there's so many resources online. For goodness sakes, you can always look up the Wikipedia summary in advance. Just get an idea of what's going on, who the characters are. If you are, for instance, if you have a second language, if you speak Spanish or another language and you see a play in English, it's not going to really be that different from an English-speaking person, because nobody really understands it. But again, I think it's really on the actors and the director to make sense of it. But, the truth is that he stole all his plots. These are all recycled plots. What he did, he created these genius characters, and how he brought the human element into each one of his plays, and how carefully constructed they are, brilliantly constructed to provide comedy, drama, and every human emotion. So I think that an audience who really experiences a fine production of this play in a live setting will experience that catharsis of the Greeks, to experience that feeling of union, of ritual, of performance. So that's my answer to that. Prepare yourself with information. There's lots out there right now.
Celeste, I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I am going to leave
pleasure.
some links to your world so that people can learn more about you after today's broadcast. Thank you so very much for joining us, Celeste. I hope you have an excellent day, and I hope to talk to you soon. Okay, that was fun. So we're back to our usual format. It's good to see you. I'm going to say some quick hellos before we move forward. It's nice to see your comments as always. Good morning, Michal. Good morning, Marge. Good morning, Eddie. Good morning, Catherine. Louise. Paul is in Washington still. I miss you dearly, my dear friend. Very refreshing, says Brian. Well, if you want to come on board, Brian, we're always going to be looking for interesting people from our community to join us. Kathleen enjoys the Globe Theater. I'm going to send you this link. You're going to love this performance. Excellent suggestions, says Jean-Guy. It's so nice that you're here with us. I'm going to very quickly go through some headlines that caught my attention just because you may want to know about them. Let's take a quick look. Well, first of all, yes, as Celeste was mentioning, we were talking about what it must have been like for the Bard to work during self-isolation. I found this wonderful article, actually, put out by the BBC, and I'm going to show you the link to it. The performance that I was referring to is on YouTube, Hamlet, a 2018 production for free by the Globe Players. By the Globe Theater, rather. I watched a little bit of this last night, and it was truly spectacular. And again, even though I understand English fairly well, it was very comforting to have subtitles in English to go along, as Shakespearean English can be a little difficult to follow. So I'm going to leave you the link for this production. I also want to share with you what the outcome of our conversation about restaurants yesterday turned into. First of all, I was so grateful that so many of you participated in the conversation about how are we feeling about restaurants nowadays? Are we comfortable doing takeout or delivery or not? So just as we finished our transmission yesterday, I decided to put together a quick survey on current restaurant behavior on my own website. I'm going to leave you the link to it. It is a very simple survey. It's only 4 questions. Number one, how are you feeding yourself these days? With a choice of cooking at home, sitting down at restaurants, ordering takeout, or ordering home delivery. The second question is, how likely are you to consume from a restaurant you are familiar with? And the third question is, how likely are you to consume from a restaurant that you are not familiar with? Um, and the last question includes a series of factors that might reassure you when considering consuming food from a restaurant these days. I am very grateful that this survey has been shared by a couple of groups in town, Facebook groups, and we've been getting a lot of really fascinating answers that confirm some of the things that we were talking about yesterday. We are going to devote most of tomorrow's broadcast to starting to look at some of these responses to find out tips and things that we can be doing for our restaurants and for ourselves as we start becoming comfortable with going out and ordering from restaurants in town. The last headline that I want to share with you defies explanation. Yesterday, I told you about these 2 women that tested positive for coronavirus that were in Los Veneros, and how the authorities found out, and then the whole development was put under quarantine, 200 plus people. Well, yesterday, 4 people escaped by helicopter, just like that. Um, we don't know who they are. We don't know where they went. Not many details have been put forth about this story, but I tell you, it can't get any crazier than this. I really hope somebody's writing these things down, because we cannot have this conversation yet. We cannot talk about spoofing coronavirus because we're not ready to talk about it yet. But when all of this is over, whoever is writing down all this craziness is going to come up with a really wonderful, dark, and mysterious musical about everything that's going on. Now, I know we're not ready to talk about this, but I know that when you are, I am going to be ready to talk about this, because it's crazy. Who on earth has enough money to hire your own helicopter to kidnap or take or escape 4 people from development in Punta Mita? I mean, it's preposterous. Just think about how many people you could have fed with the helicopter fee. But anyway, I digress. Um, as always, I am so incredibly thankful that you join me on these transmissions, on these broadcasts. I am grateful that you let me into your spaces. I am grateful for all the suggestions that you give me in terms of what to talk about and what not to talk about, which brings me to a couple of closing points. I want to do a quick, crafty show and tell, because I talked about this last week. These are my little caulking flexible skeleton leaves that I made with a silicone mold for cake making. And this is how I ended up attaching them to this empty jar of jam, because I am repurposing everything I have. So I'm going to use this to put pencils on this, like I used my other one to put my brushes. I wanted to share that. And last but not least, I want to tell you a funny story. Well, it's funny to me. Yesterday, a very dear friend of mine, um, oh, interesting, says Gail Fuller, anyone who can afford 14,000 USD a night in a hotel can afford a helicopter. You're absolutely correct. Um, but let's not go down that road right now. Yesterday, a very dear friend of mine who has absolutely no filter said to me, "Well, you're wearing that blue shirt all the time. Aren't you concerned about this? Couldn't you like change your outfit out around a little bit?" And I laughed because I knew that sooner or later somebody was going to comment on this. There's a history, there's a story behind this. When I started thinking about the idea of doing these live streams, everything that I've read from people that teach you how to do this suggests that you keep a consistent look. So I figured a consistent look means that I need to feel comfortable with what I wear. And what am I going to wear? And I have a ton of these polo shirts, and I figured, okay, I need to find a polo shirt that is comfortable, that looks okay, that looks fairly new, and that doesn't require ironing. And it turns out that I have not one, but 2. So rest assured, my dear friends, that I have two different shirts to share with you. And they're clean. They don't smell bad. I just put them on to do these casts. And then I put them away for the next day or the day after. And eventually they do get washed. So you can sleep tight knowing that I have clothes to wear. And one of these days, yes, it'll be the weekend and I might wear something else. But ultimately, I don't think that's why you are here for. Um, this is all that I have for you today. I want to thank you, as always, for joining me. I want to thank you for recommending this stream. I want to thank you for liking my Facebook page, for registering to my free weekly newsletter, and of course, for sticking around. We're going to be back tomorrow, as always, and I hope you have a truly, truly amazing Friday. And of course, the weekend is coming up. Let's enjoy ourselves.